Last week I played you Dan Tehan's excruciating response to Sarah Ferguson on the ABC about the self-evident contradiction of jettisoning net zero, well done, but remaining in the Paris Agreement, boo. Here's a brief recap.
We will take a policy to the next election and we will seek an imprimatur from the Australian people to our policy, and then that we will use that to inform the interim targets that we set through our NCD.
And it went on and on like that. But last week I also praised Susan Lee for this response to a similar question.
If there are reasons why people in Paris or in some United Nations organisation don't like it, I can deal with that.
Yes. So imagine my dismay when Susan Lee then adopted the Tehan approach when she too went up against Sarah Ferguson, who, apart from interrupting her some 30+ times, as Andrew Bolt hilariously demonstrated this week, Sarah Ferguson actually asked Susan a perfectly reasonable question.
Is this your message to Teal voters, those Teal voters that you need to win back to secure the crucial seats to enable you to actually be in government? Is your message to them that they should be thinking about embracing coal?
My message to them is that our affordable energy plan
No, but on
is about
coal,
power
is your
prices.
message to them that they should take a new look, a fresh look, go back to coal?
Sarah, we're talking about a transition away from coal as a baseload power source.
No. Susan, stop listening to your spin doctors and just tell the truth. When your policy is to prioritise energy cost to the consumer over net zero emissions targets, when your policy is to make use of Australia's abundant energy resources, and when then someone says to you, are you asking Australians to look again at coal, then there is only one truthful answer, and that answer is yes. Full stop. No explanation needed. No qualifications needed. Of course you are asking Australians to look again at coal. This is coal. Don't be frightened of it. Remember the famous words of Scott Morrison. Australians will trust you if you tell the unvarnished truth. Stop trying to win your opponents over. Stop trying to appease the crocodile. Stare it down. That's what leaders do. Simply say yes and leave it at that. People respect honesty. Sadly, things got even worse when Susan Lee popped up on another ABC show where she was quizzed about, here we go again, the science.
I've heard you say before that you do believe in the science behind climate change, yes?
Absolutely.
You were standing next to Nationals leader David Littleproud on Sunday as he explicitly said that this decision is not based on science. Is that right?
I don't believe that's what he said. He said that the economics is what we need to focus on.
He said this debate is not about science.
This debate is not one predicated on science. It is one predicated on economics.
He's certainly not walking away from the science of climate change. There may have been a misunderstanding there.
Now, Susan, a word of warning. The science behind climate change is one of those meaningless tautological concepts so beloved of the left, which allows them to get away with blue murder. Phrases like, do you believe women? Or Black Lives Matter? Or love is love? The list goes on and on. These phrases can't be argued with because they are self-referential. The science behind whatever should ring alarm bells to everyone who was mocked and ridiculed during COVID or even forced to take a vaccine against their will. There is science literally behind anything and everything because science is merely the study of how a thing works, and by understanding how a thing works allows for projections or predictions of how things may work in the future. Science is based on observation, proven facts, and precise formulae. Science is not a belief system. Religion is the description of belief systems, not science. Scientific theories evolve and should be subject to constant, rigorous testing and challenge. There is no single science behind climate change. There is a scientific hypothesis behind global warming called the greenhouse effect. Beyond that, there is a plethora of theories, models, projections, and likelihoods based on modelling, which is based on inputs and based on assumptions which may or may not be right or wrong. So when some young kid on the ABC says, "Do you believe in the science behind climate change?" again, there is only one truthful and honest answer. What do you mean? So, for example, if the interviewer smugly says, "Well, the science tells us renewables are the cheapest form of energy," a very easy response is, "And science also tells us that asbestos is absolutely deadly, and science tells us that we should immediately replace all the Chinese windmills containing asbestos, or even better, the science suggests we should immediately halt the import of all Chinese windmills because they may, we now learn, contain asbestos. And this will cost the taxpayer a fortune, money we don't actually have, not to mention, as the science also tells us, that the asbestos and or poisonous glues in or on unknown number of Chinese wind towers and wind tower blades can pollute our canola paddocks, our wheat, our barley, our oats, and even affect paddocks where our sheep and cattle are." That's the science. So no, the science is clear. If your so-called renewable machinery has parts riddled with asbestos, I doubt it is either the cheapest or the safest form of energy. Susan, faced with specifics, the typical lefty will immediately retort with some hysterical virtue-signalling accusation, such as, "So you don't believe in climate change, you're a climate denier," or some such nonsense, to which there is only one honest and truthful response. "I believe in dramatically reducing the cost of electricity to Australian homes. Full stop. That is our energy policy, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions about it." If the interviewer persists, which they will, force the interviewer to be precise and to quote whatever science they are referring to. The beauty of the phrase climate change, as Donald Trump has pointed out, is it basically refers to anything you want it to. So, for example, I can choose to accept or not accept the scientific hypothesis that the planet has warmed over the last century, but that hypothesis may have nothing whatsoever to do with, or everything to do with, the theory of anthropogenic global warming. But there are any number of other scientific theories you could also look to support that or other observations. That's the point of science, competing theories based on pinpoint accuracy, not vague, bland, feel-good generalizations. Define precisely what you are talking about, which the left never can, because everything the left does is based on emotion, dogma, ideology, and smug self-righteousness. I fervently want the coalition to win the next federal election. The damage being done by Labor on so many fronts is literally destroying the Australia we all loved and grew up in before our very eyes. The landscape is being torn asunder. Our cities are being flooded with people who do not necessarily share our values and in many instances have no desire or need to assimilate. But the left are as cunning as rattlesnakes and just as deadly. The last election was a farce. Labor simply lied its way back into power, Medicare being only one of those disgraceful lies. The coalition needs to immediately put in the hard yards to have an answer to every one of those ABC catch-all questions, and those answers must be honest and truthful. If I were Susan Ley, I would be organising a weekend away with the entire shadow cabinet and getting Matt Canavan, who we just had on the show, to brief them all, every single one of them, on every issue, from heli-coal fire stations to climate myths to windmills containing asbestos, all of it. Because there you'll get honest, truthful answers. The way to win the next election is to be able to answer questions about energy and climate change honestly and truthfully. Obfuscation is not what Australians want or need. Stop listening to the spin doctors. Pandering to the preconceptions of people who will never, ever vote for you is futile and a waste of breath. Why is Susan Lee or Dan Tehan even bothering to turn up on the ABC, which they do with astonishing frequency? Has it helped them in the polls? Self-evidently, no. If it were down to me, here's how I would answer the ABC's Sarah Ferguson. As leader of the opposition, Rowan, do you believe in the science behind climate change? That's a great question, thanks, Sarah. But before we get to the science, we have to separate the science from the propaganda. Now, I happen to have here a report from the such and such a think tank, which clearly shows that the #1 proponent of climate change propaganda in Australia is the ABC, including your BTN Behind the News daily show in our schools, followed closely by the SBS and then the CSIRO. The combined total expenditure by the Albanese government on climate propaganda, including the cost of Chris Bowen parading around the planet as the COP31 commissar, is estimated to be around, X billion dollars a year, money that the Australian taxpayer has to borrow to fund. So one of our first actions in government will be to cancel all taxpayer funding of climate change propaganda, which will sadly mean slashing the ABC's budget in our first year of government by at least 50%. And if that fails to stem the flood of pernicious climate propaganda into our schools and households, then in our second year, we will have no recourse other than to sell off the ABC. Now, what was your next question, Sarah?